So my job is to go to short line railroads, certify and recertify their locomotive engineers and conductors. So the training that I provide is the only third-party training that is FRA approved. So this is you're going to get a very small taste of what I have to offer in rail safety training. I brought some help with me. Mr. Guthrie, would you please tell these people something about yourself without scaring them too much?
South Dakota, live in Mitchell, South Dakota, if you know where the Corn Palace is, that's where I'm at, and joined Northern Plains here just this week, in fact. So.
Yeah. So I said, guess what? Great news. You're coming with. No, that's awesome. So let's have a job briefing. Isn't this something that we always do when we have a meeting with our employees? We have a job briefing. Fire exits. Here, here. Fire extinguishers are out in the hallway here and over here. Meeting place. Let's meet down in the lobby, get a head count. Who in here can call 911? I live in western Wisconsin. I have no idea where the hell I am. Who knows? Can you call 911? Do you know the address here? There you go. Perfect. Can someone go meet the ambulance or the fire truck to help the extraction process? I mean, picture yourself as a first responder. Someone's having a heart attack at whatever room this is. Don't know where to go. Can someone go get the ambulance driver to bring him up here? You got him? What's your name? Aaron, thank you. If you're calling 911, I want to ask you, are you going to use a cell phone or the house phone? Do you have a signal? Yes. Awesome, perfect. AED, I did not find one. Probably one in the lobby. That's an assumption. That's an AED. Who in here is first aid qualified in CPR? Okay, awesome. So I am CPR qualified. Who has me if I'm down, though? You're going to get the ambulance. You can't do that. You got me if I'm down? All right, perfect. What's the thing about CPR? It's compressions, right? With your hands, not your boot. Don't be doing this on me while I'm on the ground. Class is over. Let's go. Walkways, make sure they're clear of tripping hazards. And you don't have to shut off your phones. We're all grown-ups. Got to take a call, take it outside. And you don't shut your phone off. You're calling 911. What did we just do? We just had a safety briefing, right? It's something that we go through all the time. When you talk about rail safety, it's no different. I'm here to talk to you about our habits. Our behaviors become our habits. Our habits become our culture. And where I'm going with that is this. Are you safer at work or are you safer at home? Do you know where all the fire extinguishers are at your workplace? The AEDs? Has your employer ever put you through a fire extinguisher class or AED? Possibly. We know all that stuff when we're at work. But what about when you're at home? Where are your fire extinguishers at home? Have your kids ever learned how to pull, aim, squeeze, and sweep a fire extinguisher? Do we assume they know how to take the screen off the door? So I started learning all this because we used to go through this all the time. And then all of a sudden, I was in a location where we actually needed it. That's where I learned a lot. That's where you start to learn, well, wait a minute, I'm home. Where are my fire extinguishers? Kitchen, furnace, garage. And if that's where the fire starts, I probably started it, right? But where are you going to be when the fire starts? So I started thinking about it, and I put all my fire extinguishers on the back of the bedroom door. Because at 2 o'clock in the morning, when it's smoke and I can't see, I could probably find my back of my bedroom door. I could put the fire out. And I started thinking, who in here does their own lawn work? Do you weed whip your own grass? Do you wear your safety glasses while you do that? Sure, because we've all got that rock hit our cheek, right? You wear your safety glasses at work, why wouldn't you wear it at home? So I really started taking a look at this as to why I'm here. And you could read that all you want. I'm here because on my railroad, I'm the head of safety. And I made a 2023 safety action plan, and I said we're going to have 0 fatalities, 0 injuries, but we're going to have 6 human factor incidences. And my railroad guys were like, whoa, wait a minute, shouldn't that be 0? Well, it should be, but all I'm asking you guys to do is reduce it from half of what you did the previous year. My last human factor incident was last month, and already I'm at 9. And it was because my employee ran the switch. He didn't line the switch. It wasn't line lock check for his route, and he ran it. So I asked him, why'd you do that? Well, I looked at it, and I thought it was lined, so I told the movement to keep coming. Well, he didn't ensure that it was lined. And so that's why on the bottom of here, you can see that. Only you can decide to break the rules. Change your culture. Get back to basics with it. And that's what I asked my guys to do. It all comes down to this measuring stick that we call SOFA. It's an acronym for Switching Operations Fatality Analysis. In my industry, I've had 245 fatalities since they started doing this in 1992, keeping record. That's about 12 fatalities a year. Does that seem high or low? My guys are trained for 6 months before they're allowed to go out and work around this equipment. How about your guys? What was your training like? When you think about it, I got 12 a year, but that's across the United States. How many fatalities in an OSHA-related industry, which is you? How many fatalities do you think happen in a month? Take a stab at it, anybody. I have 12 a year. How many do you have in a month in your facility? You have 13 a day. 13 people every day in an OSHA-related industry never go home. That's your people working around railroad equipment, forklift operators, truck drivers, all that. You got to paint that picture with a broad brush. That includes a whole bunch of people, but that's alarming. And this is industrial railroad movements include the employees on top and the bottom of the equipments. Had a conversation with a guy this morning about how his guys are on top of the train doing lids. Is that a dangerous job? Probably the most dangerous job. You think about the snow, the wind, the ice, that's a very dangerous job. Got to make sure that they have some sort of protection, some sort of communication with the operator. They're up there, they're all by themselves if they don't have fall protection. That's very concerning. Here are the facts. Here's how the people in my industry passed. 18 because of lack of communication. 26 because he had inadequate job briefings. Do you think we could all be better communicators then? Look how many people died just because they're not having that conversation. 31 because of a close clearance. Now, a close clearance is an object or structure that's too close to the track where there's not enough room for you and the equipment. That could be a building. That could be a truck that wasn't there 5 minutes ago. 19 because they're standing too close to the main line when a train's going by. Train might have something hanging off the side of it, and when it's going by, it might catch your leg. Here's the big one, though. 92 people have passed on shove moves. That is where a shove move is where you have a person either in a locomotive or a track mobile, I'll call the operator, and you have a person on the ground who I'll refer to as the spotter, and the spotter gives him direction and distance. For example, let's say engine number 1411, I'm in position, bring them west, 10 cars to a wrong switch. That now becomes a shove move. That's why it's important when you guys go back to your industry, you let your employees know that movement has to stop in half the distance previously specified. That is so important. I can't stress that enough. Because as an operator, if you're told west 10 cars to a coupling or a wrong switch or whatever, what if now my radio dies? Or what if I drop it? Heck, at CP, I had one guy start having chest pains. He couldn't say, stop the movement. And then a lot of times the movement keeps coming because of that. Tell your operators to stop in half the distance previously specified. Can't stress that enough. 23 people because of slip, trips, and falls, not putting their eyes down before their hands or their feet. That's the number one OSHA concern today. In your industry, that's the number one cause for injury right now. I was just doing the safety presentation for a big company, And when I said that statement, their safety guy stood up and said, "Do you know how many employees of this country are home, or of this company are home right now and they can't use their arms or their hands?" 63. 63 of his employees were home because of not putting your eyes down before your hands, your feet. 17 people because they're not tying handbrakes. Well, I brought something here with me today to help your life a little better. This is called the brake stick. This allows you to apply a handbrake from the ground so you don't have to get up on the rail car. Makes life easier. Anytime your employee has to leave the ground, you're going to have that risk-reward conversation with yourself, right? Those brake sticks make it nice. 19, because those cars ended up rolling out. The Canadian National just put out a safety flash here last week where their crew pulled out some cars. They didn't take the handbrakes off. They moved these cars with the handbrakes on to save time. But when they did that, it wore down the pads. And when they put the cars back in the track, there was no handbrake. And they rolled back out and T-boned them on their engine. So all these things can happen. 37 of these fatalities occurred in the summer. That's actually very concerning. But let's start with communication. Too many times we only have one-way communication. We're not asking any questions. True story. I live in western Wisconsin. I love to bow hunt. So I bought a sidearm to help me bow hunt. But I didn't want to tell my wife. She thinks I have way too many guns. So I ordered a gun. I got the call. He says, "Hey, your gun's in." I says, "Okay, perfect. I'll be right there." I live in a town of 1,500 people. Okay, I'm just going to put that out there right now. I told the wife, I said, "Hey, I'm going to the store." She goes, "Hey, pick up some chicken." All right, I'll pick up some chicken. I went to the gun shop. I got my gun. We start talking guns. I got gun oil on my hands. I'm knowing I'm excited. I look at my watch. An hour and a half has gone by. Uh-oh. What do I do now? I went to the store, called the wife. "What kind of chicken do you need?" She's like, "You're just at the store now?" I know, traffic's crazy. You should see it. It's nuts. But had I just asked what type of chicken, she wouldn't know I have a new gun now. So I have chicken for sale. But had I asked the question, have you ever been in that situation where you accomplish a task and you're like, and then all of a sudden you're given more instruction and you're like, "Wish I'd have known that before I did this," right? That's why you got to have this two-way communication. Got to have that sender-receiver, receiver-sender going on. And that's so important with our crews out there communicating. You got to ask those questions. You can't have assumption. That is, if I ask, "Hey, Steve, would you do me a favor? Would you go down to the warehouse, grab me a ladder?" "Sure, okay. How long will that take you?" 10 minutes. Steve goes down to the warehouse, brings me a ladder. "Why'd you bring me the 8-foot ladder? I needed the 12. We didn't talk about that, right? Didn't talk. Now we just wasted how much time just because we didn't communicate. Got to have that communication. We can all be better communicators. Don't have the assumption. We don't have the same idea of what kind of chicken we need, right? When communicating at your facility, make sure that your crews are using engine number or the trackmobile name, not first name basis. Can't use first name basis. I'll be honest with you, that's a cardinal sin on the railroad because we've learned the hard way. All these things here are written because something happened to somebody else. Now, I was at a facility, I won't say where, but they had a loop track, a rack, an anhydrous ammonia rack, and they had trucks in the elevator, and everybody's on the same channel. And I kid you not, the day I was there, Larry was in the engine, Gary was in the trackmobile, and Mary was in the elevator. And if you have relays on your radios, that's just a recipe for disaster because we all have those employees who start to talk before they hit the button, or they don't wait for the relay. Some relays you can hear, some you can't, all different situations. But the first time that employee says, "Airy, back 5 feet," who's moving? Everybody. That's why you gotta talk to the piece of machine. Engine 1411, west, 10 cars to a coupling. You can see the example up here in number 5. This is how you should be communicating. This is how your workers should be communicating at your facility. Talk to the piece of equipment. I love compass direction. I do. East, west, north, south never changes. Loop track, that's pretty hard to do compass direction. I get that. That's why there's a lot of my way, your way. And but the bottom line is, as long as we have communication and we know which way that they're going to go, then that's what's important. So we do address this in all of our training. Some of it's a little bit site-specific can be when it comes to that. But the bottom line, no movement should take place until the instruction is clearly communicated, and movement must stop in half the distance previously specified. I can't stress that enough. So important. Got to have that job briefing. 26 people have died because they didn't know what was going on. They didn't know where to be. Job briefing, plan the work. Go outside, work the plan. Plan the work the plan. And even when the situation changes, you might have 20 job briefings in a day. Just don't call it that. It's just, but we got to have that communication. That's what's so important. And it helps break up the complacency. Complacency is a huge concern. We all get complacent, especially people at loop tracks, shuttle train facilities, because when I ask them, what do you do here? Oh, we just shove this train around the loop all day long and load it. But the second they're asked to go in there and turn an angle cock and separate the equipment, now they're lost because they get complacent. And it happens to all of us. It does. You get complacent in what you do, and all of a sudden something happens out of the ordinary, and that's where things can happen. Close clearance, you can see this. On the picture on the left, it says if it's too tight to ride, it is too tight. A lot of times when I go to facilities, I ask them, are you guys allowed to ride the equipment? Some say yes, some say no. What's your policy? They don't know. Are we allowed to ride the equipment? A lot of them say, I don't know. We do. Nobody ever says anything. Well, if you're allowed to ride the equipment, who taught you? Who taught you how to safely ride equipment? Gary, Bill, or whoever. We just got up. When you take a look at this picture on the right, that's an example of a clearance point. That equipment is in the clear, and how do I find that out? I stand on the adjacent track and I put my arm out like this. And if I can't touch that equipment, then I can safely come down that adjacent track. Doesn't mean that I have enough clearance to ride that equipment in there. Now maybe I have to push it in a little further. The FRA says, the FRA, which is the police of the railroad, the Federal Railroad Administration, when they come to my rail yard, if they don't see cars at the clearance point, that's big time no. They can't be out to foul because bad things happen. They tell me if you can't fit those cars in there, Steve, they have to stand on top of the switch so no one can access that track hour later or a day later. What you don't want to happen is this illustration on the top. We've had a lot of people lose their life because of that. And bottom line, it's preventable. All you got to do is put equipment in the clear. You can even identify the clearance point. Here in the picture on the left, they have some ties painted. That doesn't do you any good in the winter we just had, though, does it? So that's why you got that little hand trick right there. Or you could put up some traffic cones with some leg screws right into that tie. There's a lot of different things you can do besides corner equipment. That is totally preventable. And that could cause a derailment, that could cause a fatality, that could cause a lot of things. So we got to make sure that our employees understand you got to have equipment in the clear. Now, as an industry, you're not regulated by the federal government. I get that. But if the railroad that services you, if their crews come into your facility, they're going to start painting those clearance points to their specifications. And you're going to start losing a lot of track inventory when that happens. So you're best off to be proactive and paint it yourself. Exposure to mainline trains. Take a look at this. Here's a pipe wrench that was either mistakenly or purposely left on a tank car. And I'll be honest with you, I want to say it was purposely. Why? Who's ever used that bleeder rod on a car? You push it or pull it, bleeds the air off, and you can move the car without the air brakes, right? Look at the picture on the bottom. They're putting razor blades on that now. I have a picture in my presentation where we used to call them hobos, right? People who rode the train. They're actually a gang called Freight Train Riders of America. There's 5,000 of them, and they were presented on America's Most Wanted. because a lot of them would ride the trains. When the train would stop, they would rob and get back on the train, and no one ever knew that they were there. Well, they're drug users, and what they do is they put their syringes underneath our switch stands. So when the operator, when the guy on the ground comes to operate the switch, he got stuck with some syringes. YouTube will teach you a lot, good and bad, right? So there's a lot of people out there watching this stuff. But when you talk about trains going by your facility, take a look at the upper right. That banding wire could break, and that could be hanging off the side of a car. There's a gondola full of sewer improvement pipe. Gondolas are cool. They're the garbage can of the railroad. You can put anything in there. So there's a lot of those on the railroad right there. But these things could be going by your facility, and you wouldn't even know it there. Riding the point. This is where I see a lot of industries, a lot of things happen. They're riding into a coupling. Now, a coupling is where rail car meets rail car. You could call it a joint, a hook, whatever. But what they're doing is they're riding into that other piece of equipment. Now, here's how it's supposed to work. When you are making a joint, those knuckles are supposed to drop, and then you take a stretch. But if those drawbars bypass, all that energy is going to go down into the wheels. And it's like dry firing a bow. That energy has to go somewhere. And if you bypass those couplers, all that energy is going to go into the wheels, and you could have a derailment right where you're sitting. So if your employees are allowed to ride the cars, they must get off before they make a coupling. Here, we all deal with snow. Most of us, I should say. I guess I don't know where you're from. But this particular train crew, they were supposed to leave their train on the main and then come in with the engine to break up the ice and snow. Why do we do that? Because the engine is the heaviest piece of equipment you have available. These rail cars, when they're empty, they're 30 tons. When they're fully loaded, they're 140 tons. A locomotive starts at 161 and can get as high as 217 tons per locomotive. That's what you want to use to break up that ice and snow. That didn't happen. They interviewed the engineer after this happened because the conductor died in this picture. He told the engineer, hey, let's hurry up. I'm going to ride between the building and the car so I can quickly spot the warehouse door with the boxcar door, and then I'll walk up, cut away, we'll get going. Well, we've all made snowmen before and snowballs. What happens to compacted snow? It just kept getting higher and higher, eventually lifting this car, and it sent him into the building, killing him in this picture. I remember when this happened. It was in Minneapolis. I came by this location 3 hours after the fact. Saw the fire trucks, the ambulance. I didn't know he was in this picture until the story came out. So it's things like this that have changed policies, rules, and procedures in my industry and how we do things. It's too bad. It's unfortunate that we couldn't have thought of something like that before it took a fatality for it to happen. Because when you look at the anatomy of a car, here you go. You have your body of your car sitting on top of a truck. That's it. The only thing holding this equipment on the rail is weight. And you can see pointing out right there on the bottom page, it says flange. That's the higher part of the wheel sitting inside the gauge right there. That's just keep that car from going east-west. But I tell you, that's the only thing holding this equipment on the rail is weight and that flange right there. That's why at your facilities, you have to make sure, especially if you have crossings, you got to make sure that that flangeway is clear of ice, snow, and mud. That happens a lot. Most of our derailments in industries are at existing crossings like this, because as the trucks go over it, they compact all that snow and ice in there, and when that high part of the wheel hits that, it gets lift, and it takes it off of the rail. What do you think is the most dangerous month in my industry? Would it be the December, because it's Christmas and all the people you've been avoiding all year long are on their way over, right? Would it be because of the snow? What do you think is the most dangerous month in my facility, in my industry? It's July. It's now. Why? You get hot, you get fatigued, you're out there working around this equipment. What else do you like to do in July? What are you thinking about right now? You're thinking, when's this guy going to shut up so I can go get the hell out of here. It's Friday, right? You're thinking about something other than what you should be thinking about. That happens. Believe me, the hardest thing you'll ever do in your career, it doesn't matter what your career is, railroad, gas station, Menards, doesn't matter. The hardest thing you'll ever do is balance. And that's leaving home at home and work at work. Life happens, all right? And if you're thinking about the dog you just had to put down, or the family member who's sick, or whatever the case, and you bring that to work, you endanger yourself, you endanger your brothers and sisters. That's why most incidences, when you talk about rail safety, it's because they weren't paying attention. And this stat proves it. They're thinking about the boat, the clubs, going camping, vacation, all that stuff. What's the worst time of day? Noon. Worst day of the week? Friday. July noon Friday doesn't exactly scream equipment, does it? It's our employees need to stay engaged. You need to re-engage your employees. I read an article once where it said you lead people, you don't manage them. You lead people, you manage things. And it started to occur to me that I need to go out into the field and I need to talk with my employees. I need to re-engage them. I need to just, hey, walk up, how you doing? Engage them, re-engage them. It's so important. Because when you look at this 24-hour clock, you know, because railroad, we work 24/7. Noon's the worst time of day. But if you can see by this clock, if they go to work at 7 in the morning, 2-3 hours into the shift, they're dying. 3 in the afternoon, 2-3 hours into the shift, they're dying. It's not really at the end of their shift. They're kind of paying attention at the end of it. It's in the beginning. That's my industry. I don't know about OSHA, but that's my industry, is where they're passing away. Day of the week, like I said, is Friday. Let's talk about red zone protection. What is red zone protection? Well, it's the communication that our employees should have before they're going in between equipment. Now, there's 2 types of verbiage to this: 3-point protection and red zone protection. Where'd we get it? This is our lockout tagout. Back in 1997, there was a BNSF engineer on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and he was telling Oprah how he accidentally killed his conductor. They were working together in a yard, and they made a coupling, and the guy on the ground said, "I'm cutting in the air." The operator heard, "Come back a hair." And without getting on the radio and having that 2-way communication, he came back and cut him up and killed him. This gave birth to this. Like I said, it's too bad fatalities have to write rules and policies and procedures, isn't it? It really is, but it happens. So it started as 3-point protection. What is 3-point protection? This is the control stand of a locomotive. For those of you who are not familiar with this, this is what this is. Now, when I ask for 3-point protection, the operator does 3 things to ensure my protection. The first thing he does is this. He shuts down that generator field. If you can see the arrow right there. That generator field provides excitation to the traction motors. What does that mean for the rest of us? Makes the wheels move. That's what it does. That's what it does. With that button down, it's not going to excitate the wheels. Then what does he do? He puts it in neutral, and then he applies the engine brake. That's 3-point protection. Well, now when you go into an industry, if they don't have an engine, if they have a trackmobile or a shuttle wagon, you don't have 3 points, you have 2. You have center, so you have set and center. So that's why you get the parking brake and neutral. That's why you get the different verbiage. It means the same thing, but that's just where the difference in the verbiage comes from. So that is so important that your employees have that, because do not enter the red zone without first requesting your protection and confirming that it's in effect. You gotta have that 2-way communication. So I'm gonna share a little secret with you. When your employees are working at midnight and the operator of your locomotive has to go to the bathroom, do you think he waits to come back into the office? Nope, goes out the back door. I'm just being honest. So when our crews are out there working and someone has to go in between equipment, if that engineer steps out the back door to go to the bathroom or fix the windshield wiper or anything, he's not gonna hear it. That's why the guy on the ground has to, hey, 1411, give me red zone protection. Your operator does those three things, and then he says 1411 is set and centered. Okay, understood, out. That's exactly the kind of communication you need to have. And I understand that paints a picture like I live in a white picket fence neighborhood, but that's how we communicate. And that's exactly how the communication has to take place. It's kind of hard to read, but on the top there, it says if you are required to go between equipment, you have to have it separated by at least 50 feet. 50 feet is a standard rail car length. That's the average. Cars are much, much longer. Tank car, if you get a tank car at your facility, that's 62 feet. Who in here gets tank cars at their facility? Those are 62, 64 feet, and what else do they do with liquid in them? Yeah, and all of a sudden they're all over the place, right? So you got to make sure that that liquid calms down before you go in and hang that air hose, right? That's the guy on the grounds job. These are 2-foot tiles on the ceiling. On average, there's 2 feet of slack in each car. So you can count the tiles, count up to 10 cars. That's how much slack would be in that movement, depending on how many cars at your facility you handle. Enter the red zone, at least if you can, have 1 foot in and 1 foot out of the rail. If any unexpected movement happens, you can get the hell out of Dodge. Sometimes, I'll be honest, a little hard. You got to get both feet in there to get some of those air hoses in the wintertime, but if possible, straddle the rail. Step clear of the red zone before you cancel it and confirm that it has been canceled. That's just all that two-way communication that we've been talking about. It's so important. So many things have happened. Why is it called the red zone to begin with? A lot of people have been killed in there. That's where all that slack is happening. That's where all that movement. So you got to be careful in there. Switches. We're going to have these at our facility. This one has a hasp or a keeper on it. You can see it by the switch handle there. These are so important to have. This is a very inexpensive safety device. Because a lot of times what happens is, how do we put those on there, is because my guys would operate the switch and then they would hear it, but they wouldn't pull back up on the handle to ensure that it was secured. This hasp or keeper ensures that if what happens if that switch is not secured, the holes don't line back up. So that hasp or keeper won't go back in. And if you have different switches, high table switches, where the handle lifts up, make sure your employees are lifting them in a position where if there's tension in that the handle will leave their palm, not take their palm. Lots of things to that. Lots of things to switches. Let's talk about gauge. This is something that you should be doing at your industry. Track gauge. Here's the thing. How many times do you have your track inspected per year? You should be doing it in the spring and the fall. Before the snow, after the snow. Somebody professionally come in, inspect your track. But here's where the devil's in the fine print. If the railroad is coming onto your facility, if they're bringing their crews and cars into your facility and there's a derailment, they're going to ask for your inspection records. And if your inspection records are not, if your track hasn't been inspected in the last 30 days, guess who's getting the bill? You are. And we're going to put in gold spikes. That's how high the bill's going to be. Standard track gauge, 56.5. You're out of service if it's 58. You're not going to get your cars. They're not going to come get your cars. Now, the railroad rule is this. The same tape measure has to be used. If you use a Stanley tape measure the first time, you have to use a Stanley tape measure every time. Why? Same reason why when you go to Fleet Farm, Carhartts and Wranglers fit a little different, right? Everybody's idea of a 34 is a little different. He usually laughs at me because he's like, you haven't been a 34 since high school. But that's true. Now, but do your employees always have a tape measure on them? Probably not. That's why I put a measuring stick on my brake stick. So I went to Walmart, got this little handy little measuring stick, and up to here is 12 inches, and then up to here is 54 to 58. So while my crews are out there tying handbrakes, they can lay this on the rail, and they can get an idea if it's out of gauge or not. Now, this does not replace the tape measure. I just want to stress that. This is merely an idea if you have a problem. Now, I did provide safety training to Precision Cut Brake Stick. This is an idea that they're actually thinking of putting these on their brake sticks, just so your employees have an idea, because they're not always going to have a tape measure, right? So that is what you should be doing, and you have to make sure that you document that you are inspecting that track every 30 days. There's some other things that happen. The picture on the right, you can see that there's some scratch marks in the tie. That means there's movement there. As your cars are going over the track is pumping, and it's starting to cause that scratch in the tie. That scratch has to be added to the 56.5. So if that's an inch scratch, now you're at 57.5. Now you're in danger of being out of service. The picture on the left, spike being pulled out, that could mean the same thing, that your track is pumping, or it could mean that you have narrow gauge. Maybe you're at 55 3/4, and now as the equipment comes on top of the track, it kicks it out. It's called rail rollout, and it starts to pull the spikes out on the inside of the track, not the outside. So the inside of the track is called the gauge, the outside is called the field. So if you have a bunch of spikes being pulled up on the gauge side, might have narrow gauge. So all things that you need to look for at your facility, and this is something that your employees can be out there just kind of looking at as they're out there walking. Now the cold affects the rail. If it's 10 degrees or less, we have to inspect it daily. So what does that say about your facility? That kind of cuts down on that 30 days now, right? Especially if you have jointed rail, which you probably do. That's where one 39-foot stick meets another 39-foot stick, and we put it together with a joint bar. Now that picture on the bottom left, that's a separated joint. If that's 2 inches, it requires attention. If it's 3 inches, then you're out of service. That's where this bottom measurement comes in nice, because now they can measure that separated joint. Or you could take a dollar bill, fold it in half. Dollar bill is 6 inches, and you could fold it in half, and if your dollar bill fits in there, then you're probably gonna be out of service. Picture on the right, that's broken rail. That happens, it's physics. You know, everything shrinks when it gets colder, and rail's no different. That's gonna become brittle. Now, it's kind of hard to see on the picture on the left, but that joint bar right there, there's a loose bolt on there. We don't install loose bolts. We install bolts, we tighten them. So if you have a loose bolt, it needs to be tightened. The cold affects the rail. What else does? The heat. The heat will sit and bake this rail, and you'll get what's called a thermal misalignment, is what they call it now. It used to be called sun kink, but now they want thermal misalignment. I can't even spell it, so I just use sun kink. I got to Google it. So, but this happens, and this can happen. Now, if it's 85 degrees or more on the railroad, we're out there daily, especially if it's a main line. That has to be inspected before any anhydrous ammonia train will go over it, or any oil train. But that can happen in the heat. Right there, you can get that sun kink. And this happens to us. We're a professional railroad, and guess what? We're cutting rail out in the summer, and we're putting it back in the winter. It just happens, and these are all things that you need to be aware of at your facility, depending on where you're at. What if you find a defect on a car? That's kind of important right now, don't you think? Been a lot of derailments on the news, hasn't there? Where are all these defects coming from? Well, if you own the car, it's going to be advantageous for you to find that defect at your facility. Why? It's going to be cheaper, and it's going to speed up the repair job. If the railroad picks it up and takes it 100 miles down the road and sets it out, they're not going to be in a hurry for that, right? So how do you identify a defect? You physically or mentally place yourself at the handbrake end of the car, like so, and then the left is the left, the right's the right, and then you just give the wheels a number. Every car has 4 axles, so if you need to call Northern Plains Rail Car Repair, just a little plug there, and say the L3 wheel is bad, then my guy can show up and fix it. But here's the thing, if you have a defect on the L3 wheel, you probably have a defect on the R3 wheel as well, because it's a single axle set. So if something is wrong there, it's probably wrong with the whole wheel. Who in here uses a trackmobile? All right, at your facility, sir, tell these people what you do. When you tie onto a car, your knuckle goes east and west, correct? What else does it do? North and south. Why? Why would a knuckle on a trackmobile go north and south? Because what he knows that you don't is when they tie into a car, that knuckle lifts north and it lifts the car off of the truck, providing traction on the trackmobile, right? It's called transfer of weight. But what happens if you lift too high? Have you had to make that phone call before? You're lucky. Because on an empty, if you lift too high, you're going to lift the car right off the truck. You won't do that on a load, but you will on an empty. For those of you who do have a trackmobile at your facility, if it's a newer one, you have a button in there called MaxTran. That's what that button does. You hit MaxTran, it does that transfer of weight for you. So you take the guesswork out of it. Yeah, that's a whole different phone call if you say, yeah, the car's off the truck. Throw the keys on the dash and go home, right? You're done. Forget it. Who here works at a loop track facility? Do you tie handbrakes on your cars as you shove them around the loop? I know they do. Yeah, they do. And I would challenge anybody to stop that car underneath the loader, probably without doing that. But what I like to do is I like to come show you guys how to use the car air. Use that air. That's so important. But because nobody's taught them, they use handbrakes, right? But here's the thing. If you tie a handbrake too tight on the car and you slide the wheels, it only takes 50 feet for that picture on the left to be born. And that's called a flat spot. That's that sound that the train makes every time that wheel comes back around. Boom, 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 boom. And if that's 2.5 inches or more, that train cannot go on the main line. And it can't go more than 10 miles an hour. And this is causing derailments. Bad wheels. Bad wheels cause 44% of all derailments, I believe the number is. Track conditions is 32%. It just takes 50 feet for that to be born. Now, if you find a flat spot at your facility, take a picture of it. Take that dollar bill that I referenced earlier and say, here, Steve, take a picture of it, send it to me, and I'll say, yeah, that looks pretty bad. Now let's remeasure it. Well, how do you remeasure it? Well, you take your driver's license and you put it on top of that flat spot, then you put a flashlight on one side of it. And whatever the amount of light you can see between your driver's license and that flat spot, that's what we need to get back into round. So it may look bad, but once you put your driver's license on there and you take that other measurement, then maybe it's not so bad. That's the picture on the right, that's shell spots. They look like little imperfections. But as the wheel goes down the rail, it just gets worse and worse and worse. Now, I'm not going to speculate what happened in Ohio. We all saw Ohio on the news, right? Bad derailment. Ohio happened 10 years ago in Castleton, North Dakota, for those who remember the BNSF train. That was a bad wheel. Ohio, I'm pretty sure, was a bad wheel, but why was the wheel bad? I don't know. Now, I'm not here to speculate. Don't go home tonight on Facebook, said Steve Fry from Over the Plains says this. No, I'm just saying that all the talk is that it was a wheel. But these are all defects on cars. If you see this at your facility, you're better off to get somebody out there to fix that, because that could be a derailment. It could be a derailment at your facility. Maybe it doesn't have a chance to leave. This turned into a derailment in North Dakota. That was a flat spot. The picture on the left was a flat spot. Then it was a derailment outside of Harvey, North Dakota. That cracked wheel on the right, that's moments away from being on the news right there. And it just takes one wheel and the rest will follow. The wheel is made of a much softer metal than the rail it rides on. It just takes one and the rest of the train will follow. We all saw what happened in Ohio. Like I said, wheel defects, 44%. Track defects, about 32%. Let's talk about handbrakes. This is very important that you have your cars that you mean to leave unattended secured. Picture on the left is how to manually tie a handbrake. Picture on the right is my little brake stick here. I love the brake stick, especially as I get older. My guys have to sometimes put 30 handbrakes on a day. Your guys sometimes 10 a week. All depends. But anytime your employee has to leave the ground, you're going to have that risk-reward conversation with yourself. Picture on the right, in my opinion, makes a lot more sense than the picture on the left. Now, I'll be honest with you guys. Not everybody on my railroad uses these. A lot of the young guys still, oh, heck, I'm going to get up there and do it. And I'm like, well, be careful. Maintain your three-point contact. Don't get hurt. Don't get injured. Look at the ground before you get off the car. But the one nice thing about the brake stick is you can get this handbrake and you could reach over and get the other one. Now my employees are not jumping over the knuckle to go get the other handbrake on the other side, which we know they're doing. And they shouldn't be doing that. But we know that. You're welcome to come see how heavy this is when this demonstration's over, but I'll tell you what, this is not heavy. And they're very inexpensive for what they do provide. One injury, pay for about 50 of these things. Now, there are different ones out there. This one's Teflon. There are some steel ones out there that collapse. Those are real nice. It all depends on what your situation is. Railroad used to have a handbrake policy. Used to be 10% plus 2. That's probably just fine for your facility, but it didn't work on the railroad. But we have mountain grade, so now the railroad says you have to have sufficient amount. And we have to do a handbrake efficiency test, meaning we tie the handbrakes on the cars, then we release all the air on the rail cars and the locomotive, and we cause or allow slack to adjust. That's all the tests that we go through. Here's where things get interesting. This is the air system of a car. This is where the handbrake meets the air system. Now you can see it's circled right in the middle of the car, number 7. That's the brake cylinder. When the piston overcomes spring tension and comes out of the brake cylinder, that means the brakes are applied. When the piston's in, that means the brakes are released. Let me ask you this. If I tie a handbrake on this car, and that chain's nice and tight, and now I shut the angle cock on my engine, and I pull the pin, and I separate from the equipment, what do you hear? Psh, you hear that, right? You hear the air leaving the brake pipe. What happens to that piston in the brake cylinder? It comes out, because now the brakes are set. What do you think just happened to my handbrake? It got knocked off. 9 times out of 10 at your facilities, when your employees are tying a handbrake on a rail car and then they separate the equipment, that piston comes out, 9 times out of 10, that handbrake's getting knocked right off. There are no handbrakes on the car. In the employee's mind, there are. Show you a little video to demonstrate. Can I just hit the clicker to play the video, or do you need to do it? Hello, everybody. My name is Steve Fry with Northern Plains Rail Companies. Today, we're here located in Grand Forks, North Dakota at our car repair and transloading facility to demonstrate the relationship between a handbrake and the air brake system. Now, we were going to do this test outside, but at present it is negative 44 degrees wind chill outside, so we brought the car inside to demonstrate this. So what happens when we leave equipment unattended? We must do car securement and tie a handbrake on that car. We will use our brake stick, tie a handbrake on this car. So now what happens when we cut away from this car with our locomotive, our tractmobile, our shuttle wagon? What happens to when that piston comes out? What happens to that chain? We just cut away from this car, and when that happens, we went from 0 psi in that brake cylinder to 77, and that would put these cars in emergency. Now, when that happens, that piston comes out, but that piston still has to naturally go back in. The air is meant to leave the system. All by itself, that'll happen. What we want to do is look at what happens when that piston comes out and knock that handbrake right off. You would instinctively want to walk up and retighten that handbrake using the wheel, but let me show you option B. All we did is we sped up the process. By pulling or pushing the bleeder rod, it manually tells the control valve to release the air out of the brake cylinder. The piston goes back in, and it would do that all by itself, but we just sped up the process. Now let's take a look at our chain. It's back on. So the lesson here is when that piston goes back in, it's going to take the chain with it. Thank you. The reason I made that video, and there's one more video, and then that's the end of my presentation. But the reason I made that video is because when you put a handbrake on there and you cut away, 9 times out of 10, that handbrake's getting knocked off. But what if your employee now goes up and uses the wheel to retighten that chain? The piston still has to go back in. Now when that piston goes in, it's going to cause overtension. That's the next video. Hello everybody, we just witnessed the video of what happens when we tie handbrakes on the equipment and then we cut away. But what happens if we cut away first, then we go apply the handbrake? You can see the piston is already out, it's already extended. There's a little bit of slack in there, a little bit. But remember, the piston is going to go in, the air is going to leave the system. What happens to that chain when that happens? Now, if I were to get on there and tighten that handbrake, it would have been over tight. See how much slack was in that chain, and then I pulled or pushed the bleeder rod, the piston goes back in, takes that slack with it. That's why we got to be careful not to over tighten these handbrakes, depending on if they're an emergency or not, before we leave the equipment. Thank you. Thank you. So that's why I did that video, is because if I were to use the handbrake and retighten that chain, that piston is still going to leave, and now you're going to have overtension on there. And if there's too much tension on that chain, Mother Nature herself can come find the weakest link in that chain. My last demonstration for you before I ask for any questions is this. Who in here rides motorcycle? Do you dress for the ride or dress for the slide? Dress for the slide, right? On the railroad, we use what's called hand signs. So if my employee's radio is bad or if it dies, he tells the operator to stop like this. You stand out more if your limbs are a different color. On the railroad, we use orange vests and green gloves. That's what we use. So when you're 10 car lengths away, this stands out more. In your industry, you guys more than likely wear green vests than wear orange gloves. It's just about preparing for the slide, not the ride. You want to stand out, right? PPE is meant to have a purpose, not to be fashionable. That's my name, and I'm sticking to it. Any questions? What do you got, buddy?
So we regulate. Whoa. I'm one of you guys that talk loud, anyways. We regularly load 110 car unit trains plus or minus some, and we take our little spur takes 28 cars ish. And we load at a time. We load with 4 strings. So there are push-ups into our little serving point. And is it safer to? Currently, we use one guy on a radio, one guy spotting, and one guy in the driving. Mm-hmm. Is it safer to do that, or can we put markers down to help and assist in that situation?
No, I got to have that point protected. And the reason why all those cars are going to be a little different size, right? So, that's why you get 3-car hoppers, 4-car hoppers. So 10 of those may fit to the marker, but then 10 of the others don't.
Yeah.
Right. Now, you got to have that point protected when you shove those cars in.
Okay. It's still safer to have the guy out there then.
It is. On the railroad, we do what's called the safety stop. We stop 150 feet from the end of that track just to make sure our operator does have a handle on them, especially if you got a bunch of snow and ice on the wheels. You don't want to get all that stuff off. But that's why I cannot stress the air enough. You got to use the air on the rail cars, and that's something that I teach, and that's what's important. Yes, sir.
When we get those 110 cars in, we go through and inspect the cars, if they'll be loaded. Now, we usually... if we reject one, now is that good to reject one, or do you have to have it come repaired if you see a wheel like that or something? Just reject that car? Does the railroad take that off then by themselves?
Yeah, ask them to take it back out on the railroad and see what they say then, right? Okay. Yeah, you could reject that car. Okay. And just say, hey, this has got a bad wheel. And really, honestly, you don't want to load it, because if you load it, now we got to suck the product out of there to jack up the car to fix the wheel to begin with, right? So yeah, you can reject it, and they can come fix the wheel, and they can determine if it's bad or not. Put it back on them. CYA, cover your assets. Right?
I didn't see the scratch you were talking about on that rail. Was it like in line with it, or like?
Oh, the broken joint? Yeah, it was north
No,
south.
it was like the cold weather, like when it was.
Oh, the scratch on the tie?
Yeah.
Let me see if.
Oh, it was on the tie.
Yeah, it was on the tie. Right there to the right on the gauge side. Steve, point the scratch out for me, would you? See that movement?
Oh, okay. All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
that tie plate's moving over on the right there, if you guys can't see that. Right there. That has to be added to your measurement. So if that scratch is an inch, now you're at 57 and a half inches. You're nervous. You keep looking at your watch. They're going on break.
No, I'm just trying to keep on schedule here on a
All
Friday.
right, I'll shut
well,
up.
Friday, it's Friday. We're
Not
getting.
inviting Steve Fry
Well,
again, I
it's
tell you that.
it's Friday. Well, after I saw Friday close to noon, I'm just
right. Now,
gotta make sure we get.
all my guys want to take every July off, right?
Well, thank you very much.
Thank
Great
you, everybody.
presentation.
Appreciate it.
All right, we're now take a break until 10:30 for our trade show. This will be your last chance to talk with the exhibitors, and then we're going to have our final presentation at 10:30.